Hi, Father Ian VanHeusen here. We got to develop a name for this. I've been dreaming about that all day.
Maybe we should have people send message to us.
Yeah.
Here's what you should call it.
There you go. There you go. Actually, that's a good idea. So if you're listening to us on the radio or YouTube, give us ideas in the comments or.
Yeah. And we'll even give them credit for it, right?
Maybe. We'll give you credit for the one who.
I always like Sons of Thunder.
Nah. Yeah. All right. So, anyways, with sports, one of the interesting dynamics, right, with sports is one person's strengths counterbalance another person's weaknesses. Weaknesses and strengths. Remember, for example, with the U.S. team, remember the one guy in the '94 World Cup, he had the red hair.
Wait, the '94. How am I going to remember the '94 World Cup? I am not a soccer guy, so why don't you tell me about the '94 World Cup?
Also, there's Alexei Lalas. He's a great defender, but he was slow as all get out. So that was like his main weakness, was that he couldn't run fast.
Mm-hmm.
He was always getting outrun, but he knew enough that he wouldn't try to outrun people.
Yeah.
And then there was what was it? But there's also, there's examples of that with other sports too, right? Where they have a glaring fault, but they're able to overcome it.
Yeah, you think about that, just anything, right? Like when you know your weakness, you can often find ways to complement it with a strength. Yeah. Or you work at a strength, you work at making something stronger. And honestly, that's pretty much my married life. My wife compliments all of my weaknesses. Full stop. I won't say anything more.
And you compliment? No.
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't know that I could say that. I'll let her testify to that.
Let her talk about that. Wise man there.
Yeah.
So, because we're getting at what we want to discuss a little bit today is the idea of predominant fault. That is that you have a predominant tendency when you fall. But we also made this distinction between symptoms and diseases. We were talking about it a little bit before. We're not talking about the symptoms. So there's the sins that we do, but then there's the underlying disease. So we talk about lying, right? So, and you broke it down. It's actually a really good example. So why don't you give it?
Yeah, I think it's always helpful to understand why we do what we do, right? So lying, wrong, always wrong. But why I lie, it as far as self-knowledge and interior growth, is really important. So me, my predominant fault, which we'll talk about in a minute, is pride. I will lie to cover up a weakness, right? Whereas somebody whose predominant fault is sensuality, they'll lie to get out of something uncomfortable, right? And so knowing why is actually more important than the fact that you lied, right? In the sense of okay, I actually need to battle the love of comfort or the excess love of myself that represents. I need to battle that, not the fact that I was dishonest, because dishonesty was just a symptom of the fact that at the heart of my issue is pride.
And this is where I got talked about. I was talking about before. One of my intuitions about men in particular is that when men struggle with chastity, it's more of a symptom and not really the disease. The disease oftentimes, and consequently the cure, is a lack of interiority and a lack of asking yourself, what am I really thinking? What am I really feeling? What are my motivations? What do I want? And asking yourself those interior questions. Because I've seen a lot of men, when they grow in chastity, it's often because they start asking themselves those interior questions, and then they experience freedom in their physical selves with anger and with sensuality, with chastity.
Yeah, the why question is really, really important, right?
Yeah.
Why am I really doing what I'm doing? And
know thyself.
Yeah, and that's when know thyself is not just to know your tendencies, but to know what your desire really was in that sense, right? Because ultimately, right, what I have to do is open myself up to Christ, show him my desires so that he can turn them in the direction they're supposed to go. Because that desire that at the heart of my pride, that is a good desire. Mm-hmm. It's just disordered. It's pointing in the wrong direction. And so what I need to do is, first I need to be aware of it, but then I need to open it up, make myself vulnerable to Jesus and say, look, I've been doing this my whole life. It ain't working. I need you to get in there and work on it.
Yeah, that can be very painful. And that's where I've often said the difference between men and women is women, not always. There's some women because of pain, because of trauma, they struggle with vulnerability. But typically women are more comfortable even with that word vulnerability, right? You see it with a lot of popular women speakers or popular content for women. For men, obviously, vulnerability seems not very masculine, right? And I'm not sure where I was going with that,
Yeah.
but you should jump on that one.
No, I mean, ultimately, right, at the heart of a relationship with Jesus is that vulnerability, is to be able to just go to him and open yourself up so that he can get in there, right? Like, 'cause he's not gonna invade without you inviting him. But that never happens when I'm still stuck on the level of, well, I'm afraid of suffering, or I'm afraid that people are gonna laugh at me, or like I can do this myself, right?
And I think with men, I like the word suffering and pain. We're okay with pain if it's exterior, right? Like if I told you you could become a saint if you learned to like take this giant boulder and roll it up a hill, you would work your butt off to be able strong enough to roll the boulder up a hill.
Yeah.
But if I told you that you had to suffer intense sorrow and pain and difficulty by looking at your true motivations and looking at your heart, be like, oof, I'll take the boulder, right? Like we would much rather have the exterior pain versus the interior.
Yeah, I think it's
that's
also the known too, right? Like you would much rather have the known pain than versus the unknown, because I start opening up and seeing what's inside my heart. I don't know what I'm gonna find, right? I don't know. I don't know what's gonna get uncovered, and that desire to just give Jesus carte blanche into my heart. That's really hard. It's not just for men, but also for women. But that is a hard thing to go. I don't know what you're gonna uncover in this, and I don't know what the surgery, like how hard the surgery and the rehab is gonna be. But some of that, I think, is that if you give me a known thing, you do X, Y, Z, and you will be fine. Like even if it involves discomfort and suffering, I'll do it.
Well, maybe that's a caveat, because sometimes I know dealing a lot of spiritual direction with women and men. Women often can describe in long language and very intricately their thinking and their feelings and stuff like that on things. So oftentimes I have to teach them to kind of push through and say, what you're feeling and thinking, just because you're feeling and thinking and you can accurately describe it, now you need to like reject it. Like you need to exercise your will and say, be gone, Satan, right? Whereas with men, that part comes easy, say, be gone, Satan, but the looking and describing it and exploring it, that's the side that doesn't come as easily.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going to this idea is like getting at the why, I think it's a process. You make that discovery and then you work against it and you say, enough, get behind me. And you kind of close the door in a certain regard.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the three categories of predominant faults, and we can talk about how to fight them, right? So there's pride, which is just that excessive love of self, right? Excessive trust of self, what we talked about.
We're doing this based on Gary Lagrange, right?
Yes. And I think...
3 ages of the spiritual life.
3 ages of spiritual life. And then there's vanity, which is like love of acclamation. Like my motivation, and you understand it by motivation, right? Like think about why I do something. My first initial response, right? I do it because I really want to impress Father Ian. That's vanity, right? And then there's sensuality, which I do it because it feels good. Yeah. Whereas pride is I do it because it makes me look really good, like in my own eyes. I don't really care what other people think.
That's interesting.
And so like your initial, like think about doing something great is a good way to test yourself. And then immediately when you attach a motivation to it, you'll kind of discover your predominant fault.
So if we're walking through, I want to win the Super Bowl. Why do I want to win the Super Bowl? One, I want to be the best. I want to be the top dog. So actually, technically, for the idea of for the proud person, the idea of winning the Super Bowl, but like potentially you're not viewed as the best. Well, not viewed as the best, but maybe you weren't the best, but you won off of some flukes or something.
Yeah.
Like the other team fumbled it a bunch or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like you didn't like really earn.
Yeah, it had to be because you were excellent. Like it's a love of your own excellence, right? Like
so you wouldn't accept.
And it's your own excellence, not God gave you.
Yeah, exactly. Vanity would be I'm really doing it for the praise of others.
Yes.
So I'm doing it.
And sensuality is because I get to drink out of the Super Bowl trophy or something.
Or and I get all the money and I get all the temporal benefits.
Yeah, all the comfort, all of that. Yeah, and so knowing my primary motivation, now examine your sins through them, right? So we use the example of lying. But if I can get at the motivation, now I can actually attack the sin at its root and not just the manifestations, right? Because that lying, the example, that's just a manifestation of my pride.
One of the things I've realized particularly with doing spiritual direction with young men, being able to articulate and make distinctions and be able to have a categorical thinking helps you to put structure to things, and it really does go a far way of solving a problem. Like when you can name something, when you can, because a lot of times the real problem with people when they come to spiritual direction, or I think also, I think psychologists would say with therapy, is that they don't know how to name things. They don't know how to describe it. They feel it, there's chaos, but ordering and naming things, and I think this is where you see in the book of Genesis, that there's order coming out of chaos. And part of that ordering is when Adam names all of the animals. And so when we learn to name the animals within, we come to greater clarity about them.
Yeah, and certainly the where predominant fault also comes in really helpful is in confession.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So because that's where
that's the naming of things par excellence.
Yeah, and naming them correctly, right? So yes, you could materially name that you lied, or you could confess I lied because of pride.
Yeah.
And now the grace is penetrating the lie right at the pride, right? And so what happens is there's it's warfare, right? It's combat. And now you've gone scattershot where you're just giving this list of sins, and that's good. But if you can get at the motive or lying underneath, and now you attack the motive, now you're attacking in one spot, one vulnerable spot that the enemy has on you, and now you're attacking that.
Also another problem connected with this, there's even being able to name your sins, because sometimes some people they kind of confess negative emotions, or they it's just a blah of emotions and broken relationships, and they're not naming actual sins. So you identifying the sins, and then you identify the motives. So the more you structure that, the 7 deadly sins, the 10 commandments, you give structure to it. That'll bring a lot of order out of your chaos.
And the 7 deadly sins are important in the sense like to be able to name things, because they're really not actual sins, right? They're at the root of other sins.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so that's why
the 10 commandments are more the exterior.
And I think Garrett Lagrange in his book, I think he has an examination of conscience with the 7 deadly sins, which is beautiful, because what it really gets at is the motivation, right? Because the 7 deadly sins ultimately are about motive.
I gotta look that. I wonder if that's I never saw that.
Yeah, it's about motive.
I've perused through that book, but it's like the Summa. You don't necessarily read it front to cover.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's a few people. Have you read it front to cover?
No.
Nobody reads it front to cover.
No, that is a monster book.
Yeah, exactly.
But definitely, especially the purgative way.
He didn't even read it front to cover. He just wrote it down.
I mean, especially his description of the purgative way, which is where a lot of useful stuff, can be found, is really good. Really good.
Cool. Well, we kind of come to the end. We've been talking a little bit about predominant fault. So thanks for joining. We're doing this series on, actually we didn't talk about at the beginning, is it Father Lorenzo Scupoli, I assume?
Yeah, I think it's a father, yes.
Father,
yes.
But the way we put it on books, we don't. Father Lorenzo Scupoli's Spiritual Combat. We're kind of using it as a launch pad for conversations. You read the book, I haven't, but we're kind of perusing it and talking about it before. So thanks for joining us. If you're watching or listening, Father Ian VanHeusen here with Rob Agnelli.
See you later.
See you.